So I'm going to be talking from two perspectives, and that really summarizes where I'm coming from. I'm a professor. I publish papers on patient comprehension, on adherence, on what makes people do what we want them to do, and recently on digital health as well. I've taught consumer behavior at Wharton. If you know the school, it's a really great one. I worked with Daniel Kahneman at Princeton, so I have a substantial amount of academic credibility. But, okay, that's not enough. And that's not enough because I work on health. And health is really nice when you write papers, but if you really want to make a difference, you have to go out there and do something about it. So I have Cure My Way, which is a consultancy firm, and I work with pharmaceutical companies. There's a long list there. So it's with pharma, it's with health advertising agencies, it's with startups. It's all about creating behavior change. And this has been really wonderful because I got to see the underbelly of what digital health looks like, all those numbers that nobody wants to share, but I'll do some of those. I created my own startup, which I'll talk about a tiny bit at the end. It's called Body and Soul, and the goal is to get there, to create this lasting behavior change, and to do it by catering to people's real needs. And I think we're not always doing that. We're not always remembering that people are, as we like to say, we like to talk about beyond the pill. I think there's also a little bit of beyond the patient. They don't like to be a patient so much, and if we only talk to them as patients, we won't have them with us for a long time. So these are more things that I've been doing, advisory boards, mentoring, that's all very nice. But the goal is really to talk about digital health today. So we have good news, right? Great news. Digital health, awesome. It's prevalent. Everyone has, not mine. That's not a smartwatch at all. But you can get a smartwatch, you can get a smartphone, you can get a sensor. Almost no-brainer, not to insult anyone here who's doing the tech part, but we're there. With technology, we're there. If we're not there, we'll be there shortly. However, effectiveness, that's where the news becomes grim. If you look at JMIR, Journal of Medical Internet Research, 2015, they searched for randomized controlled trials of studies using digital health for long-term effectiveness in people with chronic conditions. 41 studies. Of them, how many were effective, found effectiveness? Yeah, 16. That's 39%. That's not really great. And that's, to say the least, and that's the truth of it. That's what it looks like when you start looking at programs. So before coming to London, I was in Edinburgh. I was at the Fringe Theatre Festival, and I saw a lot of stand-up. And I thought, it's going to be really weird giving a talk, having seen so much stand-up. And then I thought, what's in a good stand-up? Well, you have to have honesty. You have to have something funny, but with a flavor that's not quite there. That's like, it's funny, but. And this, I think, is funny, but. So this comes from a program I worked on with a health advertising agency. They came to me because it was broken, and it needed fixing. What it involved was approaching people with diabetes. They don't like to be called diabetics, giving them by their employer a glucometer for free strips, free consulting. Everything is free. Everything is phenomenal. Okay, 40% enroll. That's already a massive problem with onboarding. Of those who enroll, 68% activate. For the most part, they play with it for a week, and then they go away. After 6 months, 30% of those who both onboarded and activated are still active. We are talking, if you can't do the math in your head, I'll help you, 8.1%, 8.1 out of every 100 people are still there. That's not really pretty. So there's nothing wrong with the glucometer, but there's clearly, to me, something wrong with the psychology, with understanding what do these people with diabetes want and why are they not using this presumably really great program. To answer the question, I wanted to go to Psychology 101. My PhD is in psychology. Let's look at that for a moment. And what we do, our attitudes are comprised of 3 components, and that's going to sound very elementary, but that's really crucial. So we start with knowledge, that's the cognitive part. We continue with emotion, and then there's the behavior. And that's like, Okay, that's super trivial. Not so much. Not really. Those things that sound like a no-brainer don't always get implemented. There's a huge gap, and let's start with knowledge. So Deloitte talks about informed and demanding patients. That's their vision for 2020. And informed patients are really great. They're great because they're informed, they're less undecided, they're more adherent to their medication, they sue less, and they show better outcomes. This is with various conditions, including cancer, end of life, asthma. You have it. You have an informed patient. You have a patient who is going to do so much better. So far, so good, right? Where does it break? And it even happens with children. This is great. I did some work for a pharmaceutical company on CF. Even small children, once they're informed about why they have to eat better, will do it. But you have to have them understand what you're talking about. Where does it break? It breaks because, at no offense to anyone in the room, this guy is much closer to the way our minds work than this side of the picture. We are able to produce massive quantities of information, but are we also able to process them? I would like to say not so much. So our mind thinks in two ways. We have system one, that's this guy here. That's fast, efficient, not necessarily accurate, quick and dirty. And we have system two, which is much more elaborate, takes much longer to process. We're not always there. Our minds will primarily go to system one to find an answer. But what does the information look like? There's a huge gap. Again, working on rheumatoid arthritis, these words get thrown at me. Biologic, it's anti-TNF. What are they talking about? There are a lot of assumptions going on that I know the language, and they're not necessarily true. And if you've worked with patients, you might realize they don't always know what you're talking about. And if you haven't realized it, maybe you're just hoping that they understand. They don't necessarily understand. 90 million Americans are at a health literacy level of a sixth grader and below. That's grim, but that's the reality. And if we don't acknowledge that, we talk to them like they understand, and they don't. And why would they use whatever it is we're creating for them if they're not understanding? That's a major gap. Another gap, which I can talk about for eternity, is probabilities. It's something that people repeatedly fail at. I've done a lot of research on that. And if you even show them a probability as simple as 1 out of 92, they think it's 8%. I'm not even kidding. So if we think that things are a no-brainer, that we can display information and people will understand it, we might very well be wrong. That's my research. You don't want to read it right now or maybe ever, but I do know what I'm talking about. That's really a small portion. Okay, so knowledge, right? Peter's still filming us, but that's kind of okay, because I'm going to ask you a question and you can feel honest. He only takes pictures of me, so you can just raise your hand discreetly. Has any of you ever started a course of antibiotics and not completed it? You can feel free to raise that. That's nice. Okay, there's quite a lot of hands go up in the air. Have you ever not refilled your medication as soon as it ended? Great. Somewhat fewer hands. Or maybe you went on vacation and you took a vacation from your medication. Has that ever happened to anyone? Just didn't feel like, yeah, you've been really spot on, all three. But I'm not judging. I'm not at all judging. But this is a very educated room. You can all read, or you wouldn't be at a meetup. You're all interested in digital health. Okay, I'm not even making assumptions about your graduate degrees, et cetera. You have the knowledge, and yet you don't always follow up. I would like to say that with antibiotics, the first pill you took made you feel really good, and the second one as well. The sixth day, not doing anything for me. In my mind, there's the knowledge, I understand, but emotionally, it's just not happening, and therefore, you discontinue. We don't always remember that. We're very smart people, and we sometimes leave out the emotional component. That's a pretty standard form app. It tells this guy about his calorie burnout, about his sleep. What doesn't it do? It doesn't do emotion. What it also doesn't do is it doesn't interpret the information. It doesn't simplify it. It doesn't present it in a very simple way. And I think it was my first consulting job with a company that worked with Mayo and now doesn't exist anymore. That's how long I've been doing this, was around chronic illness. And we talked about reinforcing, and I said, but what if someone does poorly? What do we do with them? We can't just tell them, you suck, or you haven't registered, or what are you doing? Are you crazy? That's not going to fly. How do we still encourage them? How do we get them to continue? Because if you've been doing this for a long enough time and you're honest enough, you know that you need ongoing engagement. And you can't just engage the ones who are doing well. You have to engage the ones who are doing poorly. How do you do that? How do you say, you know what, things happen. Let's get you on board. Let's see what you can do. We understand. You're fine. Let's not have you view our app as a pile of failures. That is also massively important, and that's an emotional component that we are all too often negligent of including. Another study from JMIR, again, looked at apps and said initially there are three things that health apps can do. They can predispose. They can explain what it is that you need to do. They can enable. They can facilitate the behavior, and I'll get to behavior even more in a minute. And they can reinforce. And 6.65% of them actually reinforce. That means what? 93% don't reinforce the good behavior. And if you don't reinforce the good behavior, why would it continue? It's a good question, isn't it? Moving on to behavior. I stay a lot at hotels. I travel a lot. And sometimes the shower is a challenge. You can't figure it out. Where do you start it? Was it coming from here? It's coming from there. Is it hot? Is it cold? It's a lot less funny when you're standing there with no clothes on and you're cold. Not so entertaining. So I always use the faucet. But then I worked with a startup that created a glucometer. And they said, just use it. So here I am with the strip and the fake blood and the glucometer, and I can't figure out how to use it. For the life of me, I can't figure it out. And I meet with them and I say, I feel incredibly stupid. I couldn't work it. I don't understand. Where does it fit in? How does this work? And they say, this is really valuable feedback. Yeah, it is. Because you have to make sure your users understand what it is you're offering them. Again, I said it's going to sound like a no-brainer. Sadly, it's really not. We cannot assume that people understand what it is we're offering them. What we also want to do with behavior is to make the right behavior very easy. I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of nudges. There's a nudge unit at the NHS that's very big. In my field, we all know about that. I don't know if all of you know about that. But nudges are a concept that was created by Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein. And it says, let's create a choice architecture. Let's make doing the right thing very, very easy. Let's not just talk about it till we're blue in the face. Let's facilitate it. If you want people to take the stairs, make the stairs big, bright, more people taking the stairs, easier than just talking about it. So what Canon did is they created a default of printing both ways, of double-sided printing. That's it. That's the default. If you don't like it, you can change to one-side printing. That increased double-sided printing by 15%, which is a lot more than anything you could do by merely explanation. So just creating the right behavior, facilitating it, making it easy, nudging people into it is a huge help in creating the behavior. This is one of the least sexy graphs you will ever see, but that's fine, because it talks about a very real product that I created with the German collaborators, and we published it. It's called the nephro. That's incredible, obviously created by physicians. And what it does is it helps transplant patients and hypertension patients stay on top of their medication. As you can see, the numbers could look really sad. Right out of about 1,000 people who start, we are left with massively fewer people over time. But it's kind of encouraging because you can see that people are sticking with it for 100 days, 200 days, even 300 days. Some people persist. If you look at about 100 people out of 1,000, they'll continue. They'll keep on using it. What this does is it helps people adhere to their medication. But the way that was special here is we helped them. We went to the older patients, gave them a tablet in their homes, and showed them how to use it, and inserted the names of their medication. Is it scalable? Not incredibly. Is it expensive? Yes. Is it effective? It's very effective. Because the truth of the matter is that when you're dealing with old people above the age of 50, God forbid, or 65 or 70 or 75 or whatnot, and you're expecting them to understand digital behavior, you might be very wrong. But if you facilitate the behavior and even personalize it to the degree that you include the names of their medication, you are much more likely to have them continue with the behavior. Yeah, go ahead.
The graph, thank you. The graph shows 1% of people using it at the end of a year's time.
True.
and that's effective?
So are you familiar with Medisafe? They're a very popular, very successful application for adhering with medication. I heard a talk by their CEO, and he didn't give out numbers, but it sounded like people were using it for 4 months. So is this great? No, this is pretty shabby. But if you think about 110% using this over time, I think it's pretty good. And the more support you give them with onboarding, when we look at a group of people above the age of 65 who have had 0 digital experience, they continue. They like it. That's 100% of those patients. Granted, it's a smaller group, and they've received the offline support, but they will continue.
And did it lead to any physiological change in hypertension or fluid balance or anything?
So it did. The group was not big enough for it to be statistically significant, but it did. Yes. They were more adherent to medication, more adherent to blood pressure measurements, and as a result, which is not surprising, their blood pressure dropped. Absolutely. Great question. Thank you. This I'll skip if you want. Just look at the fun theory. It's really cool. The last thing I'll talk about, having spoken about knowledge and emotion and behavior, is personalization. This is Ram Fish speaking at my event in Medica. He was the VP of Digital Health at Samsung. And what we realized when he spoke was that something is missing. They were building this great watch, really interesting, giving people a lot of information. But the question is always, what does it say to me? What do I learn about this? Where do I go from here as a person? Something I've learned, looking again with my colleagues, is that personalization is crucial, and we can't really assume. If you know this, this was created by Agametrics. It's an incredibly cool device that measures your blood sugar level and connects to your iPhone. And it's beautiful, and I sat at a dinner with the inventor, and he showed me, and we were both super excited about it. And it's super excited if you like to be cool. If you like to have your gadget, as it were, take your blood sugar level. That's wonderful. But when I looked at it, at the very same gadget, with my colleagues, with older patients who have diabetes, half of them said, this is kind of small, it's dainty. How will I deal with it if I'm hypoglycemic? So that's a concern that was very real to them. And that's where I'm going when I talk about personalization. When you personalize, make sure it's relevant for this person. And maybe this person doesn't care about coolness so much. This is what asthma patients care about. Sorry. They want, when they're teenagers, they want their inhaler to be cool. They want it to be personalized. But the older patients care about different things. So if you want to cater to their needs, you have to actually converse with them or find a way to find out what it is that matters to them and makes them tick. The almost last thing I want to show you has to do with diabetes. And that's a study. I didn't do it. It came out of Canada. It's with patients who have type 1 diabetes. They're teenagers. That's really a super hard crowd to please. They don't like anything that has to do with anything telling them what they have to do. So how do you increase their adherence by 50%? You show them their trends. Once they measure their blood sugar level, you show them a trend. You say, this is where you are, this is where you're heading in 2 days. So they don't have to have the dire consequence. They can learn about it ahead of time. But the really brilliant thing that happened there was 2 more questions. Okay, this is a digital health forum. It's going to sound very, very simple, rudimentary even, but it's amazing what they did, is they asked, why do you think this happened? And that's as personal as it gets, because you can say, well, I didn't exercise yesterday, or I had a piece of cake. That's you giving the answer. The app doesn't have to give you the answer, but it asks you the question. And then it asks the second question, which is even more amazing when we're talking about behavior change. That's, what are you going to do about it to make it better? And that's really amazing, because that's behavior change in the making. You have the knowledge, you have the emotion because you've seen the trend and you know where you're heading, and you are deciding on the behavior. Nobody is telling you what to do. You're telling yourself what to do. And for the most part, you will follow up. The last thing I'm going to show you is my own platform. It's Body and Soul. I created it because I believe and I've seen that patients don't like to be engaged as patients. They like to be engaged as people. So we said, let's create a platform for behavior change. Let's create something that speaks to them with their own needs, with what they need as a person, and that allows them to engage with their health, but also to do other things, to take a bit of a breather, to create behavior change in the making, to facilitate it for them, to make it very small, very piecemeal. And this is the example I'll leave you with. We created a module for men recovering from heart attack. Very small pieces created by a health psychologist. Incredibly digital. They can do it at the convenience of their own home, at their own discretion. And they are answering the questions. They are creating it themselves. They have the knowledge because we explain what to do. They have the emotion because we relate to them on an emotional level. They have the behavior. We facilitated it for them. We've made it very, very clear and very simple. And it's incredibly personal because they are creating their own little intervention and keeping it for them to see and following up, so we hope. It's been a great pleasure speaking to you. I'm happy to take your questions. And thank you very much. You have my contact info right here.